Poor mother takes the twins to a restaurant on Christmas Eve with 20. But what the billionaire does next moves everyone. "Mommy, how many days until Christmas?" Sophia asked for the 10th time that week. Abby gave a tired smile as she passed the needle through the fabric. She was hemming a pair of pants for her upstairs neighbor. "Another $2 that would go into the glass jar hidden in the kitchen cabinet. Only 1 day left, my love." "1 day?" Lily jumped off the sofa. "Mommy, are we still going to the restaurant with the lights?" The restaurant? It was all the twins had talked about for weeks. Abby had made the mistake of walking past the place with them one afternoon in December. The girls pressed their faces against the glass, wide-eyed, watching the families dining under the golden lights hanging from the ceiling. "Mommy, look. It looks like the princess's castle," Sophia had said. "When are we going to eat there?" Lily asked, full of hope. Abby didn't have the heart to say no, not at that moment. Not when their bright blue eyes were shining so intensely. "One day we will, I promise." And now, after weeks of saving every coin, every dollar left over from her sewing jobs, Abby had $20 in the jar. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a simple dinner, or at least that's what she hoped. "Yes, we are," Abby confirmed, putting her needle away. "Time tomorrow night," the girls shouted with joy and hugged each other, spinning around the small apartment living room. "I'm going to wear my blue dress," Sophia announced. "I'm going to wear the red one," Lily added. Abby watched them, her chest tightening. They were so small, so innocent. They deserved the whole world. And all she could give them was dinner at a restaurant. But it would be the best dinner they had ever had. She would make sure of it. On Christmas Eve, Abby woke up early. She carefully ironed the girls' clothes, combed their golden curls, and put on matching ribbons. Sophia in blue, Lily in red. "Do we look beautiful, Mommy?" Sophia asked, twirling in front of the mirror. "The most beautiful in the world." Abby put on the only outfit she had for such occasions, a simple white blouse and black pants. Nothing special, but it was clean and well ironed. She took the glass jar, counted the money one more time. $20. She took a deep breath and put the bills in her wallet. "Let's go, girls. Before it gets late." The walk to the restaurant was magical for the twins. The snow was starting to fall, covering everything in a soft white blanket. The streets were decorated with colorful lights, illuminated Christmas trees, and festive shop windows. "Mommy, look at the snowman." Lily pointed to a decoration. "And Santa Claus." Sophia pulled on Abby's hand. The two of them never stopped talking, excited, anxious. Abby held their hands tightly, trying to memorize this moment. Their joy, their innocence, their hope. When they arrived in front of the restaurant, the girls stopped on the sidewalk. "This is it, Mommy," Sophia said, her eyes shining. "Are we really going inside?" Lily asked, almost in disbelief. "Yes, we are." Abby pushed the glass door open. The warmth of the place hit her face, the smell of hot food, spices, fresh bread. The golden lights the girls admired so much were there, hanging from the ceiling, creating a soft and welcoming glow. There were families at every table, parents laughing with their children, couples making toasts, children running between the chairs. Abby felt a tightness in her chest. She didn't belong in this place, not anymore, not since John died. "A table for 3. The hostess smiled, grabbing 3 menus. "Yes, please." They were led to a table near the window. Lily clapped her hands. "Look, Sophia, we got the window table. I told you we would." The two sat down and pressed their faces against the glass, watching the snow fall outside. Abby pulled her chair out slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility. $20. She had $20. She opened the menu, and she felt the floor disappear from under her feet. The prices were much higher than she remembered. Much higher. A soup, $15. Salad, $18. Kids, hamburger, $22. Abby flipped through the entire menu, her heart racing, looking for something, anything that would fit her budget. "Mommy, what are we going to eat?" Sophia asked, trying to read the large letters. "So let me see, sweetheart." Abby's hands were shaking. She turned the page, and then she saw it. Pasta with tomato sauce, $18. It was the only dish she could afford. There would only be $2 left, but it would work. Mommy, Lily pointed to a picture on the kids' menu. Can we order this? It was a portion of chicken fingers with French fries. The picture was colorful, appetizing. The girls looked at it with that sparkle in their eyes. How much is it? Sophia asked, anxiously. Abby looked at the price. $25 each. She felt her throat close up. I'm sorry. We only have $20, she said softly, almost voiceless. The girls' smiles faded a little. They looked at each other, confused. Fails only are 20, Sophia repeated. But we thought... Lily started on but then stopped. Abby closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She had failed. Once again. I didn't know it was so expensive, she admitted, her voice trembling. I'm sorry, girls. I thought we could have a nice meal here. But it's okay, Mommy, Sophia interrupted, placing her small hand on Abby's. Yeah, we can share something, Lily added, smiling. Abby looked at them. 5 years old, and they already knew how to be strong. They already knew how to comfort. Are you sure? We always share everything anyway, Sophia said with a shrug. And it tastes better that way, Lily added, swinging her little legs under the chair. Abby blinked quickly, holding back her tears. You are my brave girls. Did you know that? The waiter approached with a notepad in his hand. Have you decided? Abby took a deep breath. Yes, 1 pasta with tomato sauce. A glass of water and 2 small juices, please. He wrote it down, looked at the 3 of them. And Abby saw that look she knew so well. Pity, discomfort. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded and walked away. The girls went back to drawing on the paper napkins with a pencil Abby always carried in her purse. They drew trees, stars, snowmen. Abby watched them, her heart aching. They deserved so much more. What Abby didn't know was that 2 tables away, a man with graying hair and tired blue eyes was watching everything in silence. Edward had come to the restaurant to escape his loneliness. But now, seeing that mother and those 2 blonde girls sharing such a small dream with so much dignity, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He discreetly called the waiter over. That table over there, he pointed to Abby and the girls. I'd like to pay their bill and I want to invite them to have dinner with me. Please ask them if they'll accept. Gently. The waiter seemed surprised but agreed. A few minutes later, he approached Abby's table. Excuse me, Ma'am. The gentleman over there, he pointed to Edward, would like to know if you and the girls would care to join him for dinner. He's alone and, well, it would be pleasant company for him. Abby turned her head and saw Edward. He gave a slight wave, Kuman, with a kind smile. She hesitated. She didn't know this man, but there was something in his eyes, something sincere. He seems nice, Mommy, Sophia whispered. He looks like the grandpa from the stories, Lily added. Abby took a deep breath. All right, we can go. The waiter smiled and led them to Edward's table. He stood up as soon as they approached. Thank you for accepting tea, he said, pulling out the chairs for the girls. I'm Edward. Abby, and these are Sophia and Lily. A pleasure, girls. Hi, Mr. Edward, the 2 said in unison. They sat down. Edward picked up the menu and handed it to Abby. Please, order whatever you'd like. Don't worry about a thing. Abby opened her mouth to protest, but he raised his hand. I insist, it would be my pleasure. The girls looked at their mother, hopeful. Abby sighed and nodded. All right. Sophia and Lily flipped through the menu, their eyes shining. Mummy, can we order the chicken now? Lily asked quietly. Yes, you can, sweetie. The 2 of them nearly jumped for joy. The waiter returned. Edward ordered 2 plates of chicken fingers for the girls, a risotto for himself, and asked what Abby would like. I'll stick with the pasta. Are you sure you can have anything you want? I'm sure, thank you. The waiter jotted everything down and walked away. Edward looked at the girls who were excitedly fidgeting with their napkins. Do you like to draw? We love it, Sophia answered. I draw better, Lily teased. No, you don't, Edward laughed. It was a quiet laugh, but genuine. I'm sure you both draw very well. Abby watched it all, still trying to understand why this man was doing this. May I ask, Hans, why did you invite us? Edward grew serious for a moment. He looked at the glass of wine in front of him. "Because I saw you sharing that dish, and I saw something I haven't seen in a very long time." "What?" "Family. A real family." Abby didn't know what to say. "I have a daughter," Edward continued, "but we don't speak, not for years. And today, on Christmas Eve, I came to have dinner alone because I don't have anyone else." Sophia and Lily stopped drawing and looked at him. "Why don't you talk?" Sophia asked. "Sophia," Abby scolded. "It's okay," Edward said. "I made mistakes, big mistakes, and she pulled away. I don't blame her." "Have you ever said you're sorry?" Lily asked, her head tilted. Edward gave a sad smile. "Not yet, but maybe. One day I'll have the courage." "You should do it soon," Sophia said, seriously, "because Christmas is for being together." Edward felt a lump in his throat. These little girls spoke with a wisdom he lacked. "You're right." The dinner arrived a few minutes later. The plates were beautiful, steaming, and fragrant. The girls' eyes widened when they saw the chicken. "Wow," they whispered together. "Go ahead and eat," Edward said, smiling. They ate with relish, chewing slowly, savoring every bite. Abby ate her pasta in silence, still processing everything. Edward cut into his risotto, but spent more time watching the girls than eating. "This is delicious, Mr. Edward," Lily said with her mouth full. "So delicious," Sophia added. "I'm glad." The conversation flowed naturally. Edward asked about school, their favorite toys, and what they wanted for Christmas. "I want a doll," Sophia said. "Me too," Lily added. "One with real hair." "I'm sure Santa will bring them," Edward said with a smile. Abby looked away. She knew there would be no dolls, not this year, but she wasn't going to spoil this moment. When they finished eating, the waiter brought dessert, 2 slices of chocolate cake for the girls. "We didn't order this," Abby said. "It's on the house," the waiter replied with a wink. The girls ate the cake with joy, licking their fingers, laughing. Edward watched it all with a smile on his face. Abby noticed he seemed different, lighter, as if this evening had lifted a weight from his shoulders. When it was all over, Edward asked for the check. Abby tried to protest one more time. Please, let me pay for my part." "Don't even think about it," Edward said, firmly but gently. "Tonight, the bill is mine." She sighed and agreed. Outside, the snow was falling heavily now. The girls ran on the sidewalk, trying to catch the flakes with their hands. Abby turned to Edward. "Thank you for everything. You turned this night into something special for them." Edward shook his head. "No, I'm the one who should be thanking you. You have no idea how good it was to spend Christmas Eve with company, with a family, even if it's not mine." Abby felt her eyes sting. "You deserve to have your family back." "Maybe. But for tonight, being with you all was more than enough." He waved to the girls, put his hands in his pockets, and started walking in the opposite direction. "Mr. Edward," Sophia shouted. He stopped and looked back. "Merry Christmas." Edward smiled, a real smile that lit up his face. "Merry Christmas, girls." And he disappeared into the snow. Abby stood there, her daughters by her side, feeling that something had changed. She couldn't explain what, but she knew this meeting hadn't been a coincidence. "Let's go, Mommy." Sophia pulled her hand. Abby smiled and followed the girls as the snow covered their footsteps. That night, 4 people left that restaurant changed, and none of them yet knew how much that encounter would change everything. The day after the Christmas dinner, Abby woke up to the girls jumping on her bed. "Mommy, Mommy, can we go for a walk?" Sophia begged, pulling at the blanket. "Please, we want to see the lights again," Lily added, shaking Abby's arm. She opened her eyes slowly, still tired. But seeing the sparkle in their eyes, she couldn't refuse. All right, but let's take it easy, okay?" The girls celebrated and ran to get dressed. Half an hour later, the 3 of them were on the street. The air was cold, but the sun shone weakly through the clouds. The snow from the day before still covered the sidewalks, and the streets remained decorated with lights and Christmas ornaments. "Mommy, can we go look at the store windows?" Sophia asked, tugging on Abby's coat sleeve. "Please." Lily clasped her hands together. "We'll just look." Abby smiled. Looking cost nothing. "All right." But just looking, deal. Deal. They walked down the main street where the shops still had their decorations up. Lights blinked, decorated trees filled the windows, and cardboard snowmen smiled at passers-by. The girls stopped in front of every window, pressing their noses against the glass, pointing at the displayed toys. "Child, look at that doll, Sophia." Lily pointed to a doll with blonde hair and a pink dress. "She's beautiful," Sophia sighed. "She looks like a princess." Abby stood behind them, watching. Her heart ached every time they pointed at something. She so badly wanted to give them that, but she couldn't. Not now. "Come on, girls." "It's getting cold," Abby said, gently pulling their hands. They took a few more steps and stopped in front of a toy store. The window was filled with dolls. Dolls of all types, sizes, and colors. Sophia and Lily were mesmerized. "Mommy," Sophia whispered, "look at all the dolls." "I want one so much," Lily said, her eyes shining. Abby felt a lump in her throat. She knelt down to their level. "I know, my loves. One day I promise you will have them." "When?" Sophia asked innocently. Abby didn't know what to say. "Soon." Just then, a familiar voice sounded behind them. "Abby." She turned, surprised. Edward was standing there, in a dark coat and a grey scarf. His greying hair was slightly messy from the wind. He smiled when he saw them. "Mr. Edward!" The girls shouted together and ran to him. Edward knelt and opened his arms. They hugged him tightly. "What a nice surprise," he said, laughing. "What are you all doing here?" "We're looking at the dolls," Lily answered, pointing to the window. "They're so pretty," Sophia added. Edward looked at the window, then at Abby. She shrugged, a little embarrassed. "We were just taking a walk." Edward was silent for a moment, watching the girls who had gone back to pressing their noses against the glass. Then he turned to Abby. "May I give them a gift?" Abby blinked, surprised. "What? Dolls? May I give them dolls as a gift?" Abby hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse. She didn't want to seem like she was taking advantage of his kindness. But another part, the part that saw the sparkle in her daughter's eyes, wanted to accept. "Edward, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to," he interrupted gently. "But I want to, please." Abby looked at the girls, then at him. There was sincerity in Edward's eyes. It wasn't pity. It was something else. "All right," she said quietly. Edward smiled and approached the girls. "Girls, would you like to choose some dolls?" Sophia and Lily looked at him, then at their mother, in disbelief. "Can we, Mommy?" Sophia asked, her voice full of hope. "Yes, you can." The two of them shouted with joy and clapped their hands. Edward led them into the store. Abby followed, still processing everything. Inside, the store was a true world of toys, full shelves, colors everywhere, soft music playing in the background. There were dolls of all shapes and sizes hanging on the walls and arranged on the shelves. "You can pick whichever one you like best," Edward said, kneeling beside them. The girls stood still for a moment, looking around with wide eyes. "There are so many doll-like," Sophia whispered. "I don't know which one to choose," Lily said, spinning slowly. Edward chuckled softly. "No rush. Take your time." Sophia walked to a shelf and picked up a doll with curly blonde hair and a sparkling blue dress. She hugged the doll carefully, as if it were fragile. "This one, Mommy, she looks like me." Abby smiled. "She really does, my love." Lily kept walking through the store, looking at every doll. She stopped in front of one with straight, light brown hair, wearing a red dress with golden details. "I want this one," she said, grabbing the doll and holding it tightly to her chest. Edward smiled. "Great choices, girls." He took both dolls from their hands and went to the counter. Abby stood a little behind, watching the scene. The girls couldn't take their eyes off the dolls, as if they were afraid they might disappear. Edward paid her, and the employee placed each doll in a colorful bag. He took the bags and knelt down again to the girls, level. "Take good care of them, okay?" "We will," Sophia promised. "You can count on it," Lily added. He handed them the bags. The girls opened them right there, took the dolls out and hugged them tightly. Then, without warning, They put the dolls in Abby's hands and ran to Edward. They hugged him so hard he almost lost his balance. "Thank you, Mr. Ed," Sophia said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's the best present of our lives," Lily added, squeezing him even tighter. Edward felt his eyes sting. He hugged them both back, closing his eyes for a moment. "You're welcome, girls. You're welcome." Abby watched it all, dolls in her hands and tears in her eyes. She had never seen her daughters so happy. When the girls let go of Edward, he stood up and looked at Abby. She quickly wiped her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. "You have no idea what this means to them." Edward shook his head. I think I do." They left the store together. The girls walked ahead, talking to their dolls, giving them names, making up stories. "Want to get some coffee?" Edward asked. "There's a coffee shop right on the corner." Abby looked at him, then at the girls. "All right." They went into the coffee shop. It was a small, cozy place with wooden tables and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. Edward ordered 2 coffees and 2 hot chocolates for the girls. They sat near the window. Sophia and Lily were engrossed with their dolls, barely paying attention to what the adults were saying. "Have you always been so generous?" Abby asked, holding her cup. Edward gave a sad smile. "No, in fact, I spent a long time being selfish." Abby didn't say anything, just waited. "I lost a lot because of it," he continued. "People I loved, moments that don't come back. And now I just want to try to do things differently." "Do things differently how?" "By being present, being useful, being a better person." Abby looked at him attentively. There was pain in those words, but there was also hope. "You are already a good person," she said sincerely. Edward smiled but didn't reply. They stayed there for a while longer, talking about simple things, about the winter, about the city, about the girls. Nothing deep, but it was comfortable. When they finished, Edward walked them to the street. "Thanks again," Abby said, "for everything." "No need to thank me." The girls said goodbye with tight hugs. Edward waved and walked in the other direction. Abby stood watching him walk away, with the girls by her side, each holding her new doll. Something was changing, she could feel it. She couldn't quite explain it, but she knew Edward was becoming a part of their lives, and strangely that didn't scare her. On the contrary, for the first time in a long time, Abby felt less alone. 2 days later, in the afternoon, someone knocked on Abby's apartment door. She was sewing a skirt for a client, her fingers quickly passing the thread through the fabric. The girls were on the living room rug, playing with the dolls Edward had given them. "I wonder who that is," Abby murmured, setting her sewing aside. She opened the door and was surprised to see Edward standing there, his hands in his pockets and a slightly sheepish smile on his face. "Hi," he said almost shyly. "Sorry to show up unannounced. I was just passing by and thought I'd say hello." Abby blinked, still processing. "Oh yes, of course. Come in." Edward entered slowly, looking around. The apartment was small, simple, but clean and tidy. There was a worn sofa near the window, a coffee table with stacked magazines, and a rug where the girls were playing. "Mr. Ed," Sophia was the first to notice. She dropped her doll and ran to him. "You're back." Lily did the same, hugging his leg. Edward laughed, kneeling down to their level. "I am back. I missed you." "We missed you too," Sophia said, pulling his hand. "Come see our dolls." He let himself be led to the rug. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, and the girls showed him the dolls, both talking at once about the names they had chosen, the stories they were making up. Abby stood by the door, watching. There was something strange about the scene, something good. Edward, a man she barely knew, was sitting on her living room floor, listening to her daughters with genuine attention. "I want some coffee," she asked. Edward looked up at her and smiled. "I'd love some." Abby went to the kitchen and made 2 coffees. When she came back, Edward was still on the floor, now helping the girls build a house out of pillows. "Here you go." She handed him the cup. "Thank you." He took a sip, still sitting on the floor. The girls continued to play around him, as if his presence there was the most natural thing in the world. Abby sat on the sofa, watching. There was something different about Edward. He wasn't there to impress, or to help with money or gifts. He was just there, present, attentive, real. "Your home is cozy," Edward commented. looking around. It's small, Abby said with a shrug, but it's what we have. It's not about the size, it's about what's inside. She didn't know what to say. She just took a sip of her own coffee. They stayed like that for almost 2 hours. Edward played with the girls, helped them with a puzzle, listened to their made-up stories. Abby went back to her sewing, but every now and then she would look up at them, feeling something strange in her chest. As the sun began to set, Edward stood up. "I think I've overstayed my welcome," he said, smiling. "You haven't overstayed anything," Abby replied. The girls hugged him at the door. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Lily asked hopefully. Edward looked at Abby as if asking for permission. She nodded. "If you want me to, I'll be back." "We want you to," they both said together. Edward smiled and left. Abby closed the door slowly, leaned against it, and took a deep breath. Something was changing, and she didn't know if she should be worried or just let herself feel it. The next day, Edward came back. And the day after that, he always showed up in the mid-afternoon when the sun began to slant in the sky. He never brought anything with him. No toys, no gifts, no bags. Just himself. And that, somehow, was more than enough. The girls began to wait for him. They would listen for the sound of footsteps in the hallway. When they recognized his walk, they would run to the door before he even knocked. "Mr. Ed," they would shout, opening the door with shining eyes. And Edward, always with that calm smile, would kneel down to greet them. "Hi, girls. How was your day?" They would pull him inside, both talking at once, telling him about cartoons, games, and things that only made sense in their world. And Edward would listen. Really listen. He didn't pretend to pay attention while thinking about something else. He heard every word, asked questions, laughed at their silly jokes, and was impressed by their small achievements. Abby noticed this, and she also noticed how it changed the girls. They were happier, more outgoing, more confident. One morning, Edward showed up earlier than usual. Abby was still in her pajamas, making breakfast. The girls were at the table, eating toast with jam. When the doorbell rang, Abby frowned. Who could that be at this hour? She opened the door and was surprised to see Edward. "Sorry," he said, a bit sheepishly. "I woke up early and, well, I had nothing to do. May I come in?" Abby looked at her own clothes, then at him. "I'm in my pajamas. I don't mind." She smiled and made room for him. "Come in, but you'll have to have breakfast with us." "Best invitation I've had all day." The girls squealed when they saw him. Edward sat at the table with them, accepted a piece of toast that Sophia insisted on spreading jam on, and drank coffee while listening to Lily tell him about a dream she had about a unicorn. Abby watched it all from the sink, washing the dishes. There was something surreal about the scene. Edward, a man who probably had an important life, sitting at the old little table in her apartment, eating burnt toast and listening to stories about unicorns. But he seemed happy, genuinely happy. And that intrigued Abby. What was this man looking for here? What did he find in this simplicity? The days continued to pass. Edward would come and go at no specific time, without calling. Sometimes he stayed for 10 minutes. Other times he stayed the whole afternoon. He never brought anything. No gifts, no toys, nothing but his own presence. And the girls loved it. They played hide and seek with him in the small apartment. They asked him to draw with them. They made him read stories with funny voices. They showed him every scribble, every achievement, every silly detail of their day. And Edward participated in everything, without rushing, without looking at his watch, without seeming like he had something better to do. Abby slowly started to get used to it. She started making an extra cup of coffee every morning, even on the days he didn't show up. The cup would sit there on the table, like a silent invitation, and Edward always drank from that cup when he arrived. One afternoon, he was sitting on the sofa with Sophia on one side and Lily on the other. They were watching an old cartoon on the small television. Abby was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for dinner. She glanced into the living room from time to time, seeing the three of them there, quiet, just sharing the moment. There was something very beautiful about that scene, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Family. Not in the traditional sense, but in the sense of people who cared, who were present, who chose to be there. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Edward and Abby sat in the living room. He was on the sofa, she was in the chair next to it. The silence between them was comfortable. There was no need to fill every second with words. "Can I ask you something?" Abby said, breaking the silence. "Of course. Why do you come here?" Edward was quiet for a moment, looking at the empty cup in his hands. "Because here I feel alive." Abby frowned. "Alive?" "Yes. Out there, in my world, everything is empty. Big, but empty. I have a huge house, but it's just a space. It has no life, no sound, nothing. But here," he looked around, "here there's laughter. There's movement, there's simplicity, and that reminds me of things I'd forgotten." Abby didn't say anything. She just watched him. "You don't have to come all the time, you know," she said quietly. "We don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Edward replied, looking directly at her. "You are a gift." Abby felt her eyes sting. She blinked quickly, looking away. "Stay for dinner tomorrow," she said, changing the subject. Edward smiled. "I'd love to." The weeks passed, and the routine became firmly established. Edward showed up almost every day, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes just to say a quick hello before heading somewhere else, but he always came back. And slowly, that presence began to heal things. The girls, he who used to be quiet and insecure around strangers, now laughed loudly and spoke without fear. They would run to the door whenever they heard footsteps in the hall, hoping it was Edward. And when it was, their smiles lit up everything. Abby changed too. She, who had carried the world alone since her husband died, began to share small moments. She began to trust. She began to let someone in. There were no promises between them. Edward never talked about the future, never made plans, never created expectations. And in a way, that was freeing. There was no pressure, no obligations, just affection. Spontaneous, true. One afternoon, Edward was sitting on the floor with the girls, building a castle out of colorful blocks. "Mr. Ed, are you going to stay forever?" Lily asked suddenly, stopping her stacking of the blocks. Edward stopped too, holding a red block in his hand. "I don't know, Lily, but we want you to stay," Sophia said, moving closer to him. Edward looked at the two of them, then at Abby, who was sitting on the sofa with some sewing in her hands. "I want to stay too," he said sincerely, "but life doesn't always let us choose everything." The girls didn't fully understand. They just accepted it and went back to playing. But Abby understood, and she felt her chest tighten. She knew that this, as beautiful as it was, wasn't guaranteed. People like Edward didn't stay in lives like hers forever. That wasn't how the world worked, but for now, he was here, and that would have to be enough. That night, after Edward left, Abby put the girls to bed. "Mommy, is Mr. Ed our real friend now?" Sophia asked, hugging her doll. "Yes, he is, my love. I like him a lot," Lily said, yawning. "He's nice and funny." "He is, isn't he?" Abby tucked them in, gave each a kiss on the forehead, and turned off the light. In the hallway, she stopped and leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. Edward had entered their lives without asking for permission, and now he was there, filling a space she didn't even know existed. There were no promises, no guarantees, nothing but shared days and simple moments. But maybe that was exactly what they all needed, and maybe, just maybe, it was what Edward needed too. The companionship was healing old silences, in him and in her. Edward didn't bring toys. He didn't bring material help. He didn't solve problems with money. He was just present. And that, they all discovered, was the most valuable gift anyone could give. As much as Abby feared what would come next, she couldn't deny that for the first time in a long time, there was something like hope. Hope that, even without promises, spontaneous affection would be enough to sustain this fragile but true bond. And as long as it lasted, she would allow this man with tired eyes and a wounded heart to be part of their lives. Because, in the end, everyone deserved a second chance to be present. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. The girls were in their room playing with their dolls, and the house was in a rare and pleasant silence. Edward had arrived a little over an hour ago. He was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee while Abby finished folding some clean clothes. He watched her work. Her movements were quick, precise, automatic. Like someone who had been doing it for so long she didn't even need to think. "You never stop, do you?" Edward commented, taking a sip of his coffee. Abby looked at him and gave a slight smile. "I don't have much time to stop." "But you should. Everyone should." She shrugged and placed the last folded item in the basket. "Then when you're raising daughters alone, rest is a luxury." Edward was silent for a moment. There was something in that sentence that felt heavy. Alone. He hesitated, but curiosity and the desire to understand more about this woman spoke louder. "Can I ask you something?" he said cautiously. "You can. The girl's father, he—" Abby stopped what she was doing. She stood with her back to him for a few seconds, her hands resting on the edge of the table. Then she took a deep breath and turned to face him. "He passed away," she said, her voice firm but low. "Almost 4 years ago." Edward felt his chest tighten. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you." She pulled out a chair and sat at the table, across from him. She crossed her arms, as if protecting herself from something invisible. "How did it happen?" Edward asked, then hesitated. "Sorry, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "It's okay," Abby said, looking at the empty cup in front of her. "It was a car accident. He was coming home from work. It was winter. The road was slippery and he lost control." Edward didn't say anything. He just listened with all the attention he could give. "It was sudden," Abby continued, her voice starting to tremble slightly. "In the morning, he left like always, kissed the girls, said he'd be back soon. And he never came back." She paused, blinking quickly to push back the tears. The girls were so little. They had just turned 1. They barely remember him. Sometimes they ask, they ask about their father, and I tell them stories. I show them pictures. But to them, it's like he's someone from a book. Someone who existed, but whom they never really knew. Edward felt his heart ache with every word. He saw the pain in her eyes, but he also saw something else. Strength. A quiet strength that held everything together. "And you? How did you deal with it all?" he asked, his voice low. Abby gave a sad, tired smile. "I didn't have a choice. I woke up the day after the funeral, and they were there, crying, hungry, needing me, needing a bath, food to be held. So I did what I had to do. I got up and moved on." "But you missed him." "Of course I did," Abby replied, her voice cracking a little. "I still do every day. When the girls do something funny and I want to share it with him. When I'm tired and wish I had someone to help me. When the loneliness hits at night and I remember I'm alone, but—" She took a deep breath. "I can't sink into it. Because they depend on me." Edward watched her, amazed. There was something extraordinary about this woman, something that went beyond words, beyond circumstances. "It must have been so hard," he said. "It was. It still is sometimes." Abby looked towards the bedroom door, from where the muffled laughter of the girls was coming. "But they keep me going. When I think I can't do it, I look at them and I know I have to. I don't have the right to give up. They didn't ask to be born. They didn't ask to lose their father, so I have to be strong. For them." Edward felt a lump in his throat. He had lived for so long thinking only of himself, his own pains, his own losses. And here was this woman, who had lost her husband, who was raising 2 daughters alone, who barely had enough money to eat properly. And she still found the strength to smile, to keep going, to love. "You're incredible," he said, without thinking, the words coming straight from his heart. Abby blinked, surprised. "Me? No. I just do what any mother would do." "No," Edward shook his head, firmly. "Not every mother would. Some people give up. They throw in the towel. They let the pain win, but you hold it all together, alone. And you still manage to give them love. You still manage to smile. That's not a small thing, Abby. That's extraordinary." Abby looked away, embarrassed. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not that kind, especially not from someone like Edward. "I just do what needs to be done," she murmured, her voice low. Edward was quiet, watching her. There were so many things he wanted to say, So many things he felt but didn't know how to put into words. He wanted to tell her about his own daughter, about how he had failed as a father, about how he had lost everything by being selfish, by not being there when he should have been. He wanted to say that he admired Abby because she was everything he hadn't been. But he didn't say anything. This moment wasn't about him, it was about her strength, about the silent courage she carried every day, without complaining, without expecting recognition, without asking for help. "They're lucky to have you," Edward said finally, his voice filled with sincerity. Abby looked at him, her eyes shining. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough, that they deserve more, a better house, toys, new clothes, a father." "You are more than enough," Edward interrupted, firmly. "So much more. They have what matters. They have love. They have presence. They have someone who fights for them every day. That's worth more than anything." There was a silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of understanding, of respect, of something deep that neither of them knew how to name. Abby quickly wiped her eyes before the tears could fall. "Thank you," she said, her voice low and choked with emotion, "for listening, for understanding. Thank you for trusting me." They sat there at the table in a silence that said more than any words ever could. Edward admired this woman, not just for her simple beauty or her kindness, but for her strength, her resilience, her ability to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. And in a way that made him ashamed, because he who had everything, money, comfort, opportunities, had given up so easily. He had wallowed in his own pain, his own selfishness, and lost what mattered most. While Abby, who had nothing, kept fighting, every single day, without hesitation, without giving up. The girls appeared at the kitchen door, interrupting the moment. "Mr. Ed, come play with us," Sophia called excitedly. "We're having a tea party," Lily added, holding a toy teacup. Edward smiled and stood up. "I'm coming, girls." He looked at Abby one more time. She smiled faintly, her eyes still moist, but grateful. Then he followed the girls to their room, where an imaginary tea party was happening, with dolls sitting in a circle and plastic teacups scattered around. Abby remained seated at the table, alone, looking out the window. The afternoon light came in softly, illuminating the small kitchen. She didn't know what Edward was thinking. She didn't know what he was feeling. But she knew that somehow he saw her, truly saw her, and that after so long of being invisible meant more than he could ever imagine. That afternoon, Edward didn't talk about himself. He didn't share his own pains. He didn't try to compare sufferings or steal the spotlight. He just listened and watched and admired. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in speaking, it's in recognizing the strength of another, in respecting it, in valuing it, and Edward recognized it deeply. Abby was an ordinary woman with an ordinary life, full of hardships. But she had a silent courage that few possessed, an invisible strength that held everything up. That kept that family standing, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. And that he knew was something rare, something precious, something worthy of all the admiration in the world. As the girls' laughter echoed from the room, Edward smiled. And for the first time in a long time, he felt he was in the presence of someone truly admirable. Someone who, without realizing it, was teaching him how to be better. The afternoon had been good, better than good, actually. Edward spent hours playing with Sophia and Lily. They had insisted on having a fashion show with the dolls, and he ended up being the official judge of the competition. He clapped, gave imaginary scores, and pretended to be impressed with every paper dress they created. The girls laughed so much that Abby had to ask them to quiet down, worried about the neighbors. As the sun began to set, Edward said his goodbyes. The girls hugged him tightly, as they always did, and Abby walked him to the door. "Thanks for coming," she said, smiling. "Thanks for having me," Edward replied. "Always." He walked down the building stairs slowly, his hands in his coat pockets. The night air was cold, biting. The street was empty, silent, lit only by the yellowish streetlights. Edward walked to his car, got in, and sat there for a moment. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring into nothing. There was a heaviness in his chest, something he tried to ignore whenever he was with Abby and the girls. But now, alone in the car, the weight returned, complete, suffocating. He took a deep breath and started the car. The drive home was silent. No radio, no music, just the sound of the engine and the muffled noise of the streets. Edward's house was on the other side of town. It was big, beautiful, with a front garden and a spacious garage, the kind of house anyone would find enviable. But it was empty. He opened the door and went inside. The silence hit him like a wall. There was no laughter, no voices, no life, just echo. Edward dropped his keys on the console table near the entrance and walked to the living room. He turned on just one lamp in the corner, leaving the rest of the room in semi-darkness. He sat on the large, dark leather sofa and stayed there, motionless, looking at the blank wall in front of him. The house seemed bigger when he was alone. The ceilings seemed higher, the walls farther away. Everything here screamed loneliness. He closed his eyes, trying to hold on to the memories of the afternoon, the laughter of Sophia and Lily, Abby's smile, the feeling of belonging somewhere, even if just for a few hours. But reality always came back. That wasn't his real home. That wasn't his real life. This was just the leftover. What remained after he lost everything. Edward got up and went to his office. It was a small room with a wooden desk, shelves full of books he never read, and a window overlooking the backyard. He opened the top drawer of the desk slowly, as if he were about to touch something sacred. Inside, carefully stored among old papers, was an envelope yellowed with age. He took the envelope with slightly trembling hands and pulled out an old photograph. The image showed a small blonde girl with bright blue eyes and a wide smile. She was sitting on a swing, holding tightly to the chains, her hair flying in the wind. She wore a blue dress with white flowers. Ruby. She must have been about 5 years old in the photo. The same age as Sophia and Lily now. Edward sat in his chair, holding the photo carefully, as if it would fall apart at any moment. The dim light from the lamp illuminated only half of his face, leaving the other half in shadow. He ran his finger over the image, over his daughter's face, over the eyes that shone with pure joy. "How I miss you," he whispered, his voice low, broken. The longing hit him hard. It was a physical pain, real. It lived in his chest and never completely went away. It just hid during the day, waiting for the night to return with full force. He remembered her smile, the way she called him Daddy in that thin, loving voice, the way she would run to him when he came home from work, jumping into his arms without fear of falling. But he also remembered the day everything changed, the day she found out the truth, and everything fell apart. Edward closed his eyes, trying to push away the bad memories, but they came anyway. They always came when he was alone. He remembered the look on Ruby's face when she learned of the affair. She was about 12 at the time, old enough to understand, too young to process that pain. He remembered the disappointment in her eyes, the anger, the deep hurt. He remembered how she yelled at him, how she cried until she had no tears left, how she said he had destroyed their family, that it would never be the same again. And she was right. Nothing was ever the same after that. Edward had cheated on her mother. He had been selfish, weak, cowardly. He had put his own desires above the family he had sworn to protect. And Ruby paid the price. She pulled away, closed herself off, and when he tried to get close, she rejected him, rightfully so. So he gave up. He thought it was for the best, that she deserved to live without him, without the presence of someone who had only caused her pain. But the truth was different. The truth was that he was afraid to face what he had done, afraid to see the disappointment in her eyes every day, afraid of not being forgiven. So he fled to this big, empty house, pretending everything was fine. Edward opened his eyes and looked at the photo again. Ruby smiled at him, frozen in that moment of innocent happiness. "You were so happy," he murmured, his voice trembling. "And I destroyed it. I destroyed everything." He held the photo against his chest for a moment, as if hugging his daughter. But it was just paper, cold, distant. He carefully put the photo back in the envelope and closed the drawer slowly, as if burying something precious he didn't have the courage to keep on display. He got up and went to the window. Outside, The garden was dark. The trees swayed in the cold night wind. Everything seemed dead. He thought of Sophia and Lily. He thought of how full of life they were, of joy, of innocence, exactly as Ruby had been, and he thought about how he was getting attached to them, how he was trying somehow to fix in the present what he had destroyed in the past. But was that fair? Did he have the right to seek redemption like this? To use that family to fill the void he himself had created? He didn't know. He only knew that when he was with them, the pain lessened, the emptiness shrank, the loneliness receded. But when he came home, it all came back. The guilt, the longing, the regret. Edward left the office and went to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator but didn't take anything. He just stood there, looking inside without really seeing. The house was completely silent, a silence that hurt his ears, that weighed on his shoulders. He closed the refrigerator and leaned against the counter, running his hands over his tired face. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself. He knew he couldn't go on like this. He knew he had to face the past. He had to go to Ruby. He had to at least try to fix what he had broken, but the fear was greater than the courage, and so he stayed there, trapped, between what he should do and what he could do. Edward turned off the lights and went up the stairs to his bedroom. He lay on the bed, still dressed, looking at the dark ceiling. He thought of Abby, of how strong she was, of how she faced everything alone, without running, without giving up, without hiding. And he wondered if he would ever have that courage, the courage to go back, to ask for forgiveness, to try to rebuild what he had destroyed. But for now, all he had was the longing and the silence. The longing that lived inside him, that accompanied him every day, that squeezed tighter on lonely nights when there was nothing to distract him. Abby didn't know this. The girls didn't know. No one knew. That pain was his alone, kept safe, hidden, silent. And as he closed his eyes, trying to sleep, the last thing he saw was Ruby's face, small, smiling, happy, on the swing, with her hair flying in the wind, a time that would never come back and that he didn't know if he would ever be able to recover. The afternoon came on gently, with the golden sunlight streaming through the living room window. The girls were in their room drawing and the house was quiet. Edward was sitting on the sofa, a cup of coffee in his hands. Abby was in the chair next to him, sewing a blouse. The silence between them was comfortable, as it had become lately. But there was something different that day. Edward seemed distant, thoughtful, as if he was carrying something heavy that needed to be released. Abby noticed. She always noticed. "Is everything okay?" she asked, without taking her eyes off her sewing. Edward looked at her, hesitated, then glanced down at his cup. "Can I tell you something?" Abby stopped sewing and looked at him. "Of course." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I told you I have a daughter, Ruby." "Yes, you said you don't talk much." "Yeah, but I didn't tell you why." Abby put her sewing aside and shifted in her chair, giving him her full attention. Edward was silent for a few seconds, searching for the right words, but there were no right words for this, only the truth. "I cheated on her, Mother," he said, his voice low. Abby didn't say anything. She just waited. It was a few years ago. I was lost, dissatisfied, looking for something I didn't even know what it was, and I ended up cheating. It was a mistake, a huge mistake. He paused, swallowing hard. Ruby's mother found out, and she told her. Ruby was about 12 at the time, old enough to understand, and she didn't forgive me. Abby listened in silence, without judgment. "She looked at me in a way I'll never forget," Edward continued, his voice cracking, "like I was a stranger, like everything we had built had vanished." He put the cup on the table. She pulled away, stopped talking to me. When I tried to get close, she would run away, and I thought it was for the best, that she deserved to live without me. "But you miss her," Abby said softly. "Every day," Edward admitted, his eyes welling up. "I look at Sophia and Lily, and I remember Ruby at that age. I remember how happy she was, how much she loved me. And I remember that I destroyed all of it." Abby felt her chest tighten. There was so much pain in those words. "Have you ever tried to talk to her?" Edward shook his head. "No, I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That she'll hate me, that she won't want to see me, that it's too late." Abby was silent for a moment. Then she leaned forward, looking into his eyes. "Edward, you made a mistake, that's true, but continuing to hide won't fix anything. It will only make things worse." "I know," he murmured, "but it's hard to face what I did." "I know it is," Abby said, firmly but gently. "But you've already taken the first step." Edward frowned. "What step?" "You've acknowledged your mistake. You feel guilty. You want to fix it. That's already more than most people do." He looked at her, processing. "But what if she doesn't forgive me?" "What if she does?" Abby countered. "You won't know if you don't try." Edward looked away, struggling with his emotions. "I don't know if I can." Abby stood up, went to him, and sat beside him on the sofa. She placed her hand on his. "You can," she said, looking into his eyes. "You're stronger than you think. I see it. I see how you've changed. You're not that person who made the mistake anymore. You're trying to be better, and Ruby deserves to see that." Edward felt tears well up. He blinked quickly, but a few escaped. "What if it's too late?" "It's never too late to try," Abby replied. "Never. As long as you're both alive, there's a chance. But you have to go to her. Go to her. Speak from the heart. No excuses, no justifications. Just tell the truth. Say you're sorry, that you miss her, that you want a chance." Edward looked at her, amazed. "And if she sends me away?" "Then you go back another day," Abby said, squeezing his hand. "And another, until she listens to you. Until she sees that you're sincere." Edward took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside him, something that felt like hope. "Do you think she could forgive me?" Abby held his hands firmly. "I don't know. But I know you deserve to try. And she deserves to hear it. You both deserve that chance." There was a silence. Edward looked down at their intertwined hands, feeling the support, the strength she was giving him. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, "for listening to me, for not judging me." "We all make mistakes," Abby replied. "What matters is what we do after." Edward nodded, wiping his eyes. "You're amazing, you know that." Abby smiled faintly. "So I'm just someone who wants to see you happy." They sat there, side by side. No more words were needed. Everything had been said. Abby had given him what he needed. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a guarantee. But it was courage. It was encouragement. It was the certainty that he wasn't alone. A few minutes later, the girls ran out of their room. "Look, Mr. Ed." "I drew you," Sophia said, showing a stick figure with grey hair. "And I drew Mommy," Lily added, showing another stick figure with yellow hair. Edward smiled, discreetly wiping away his tears. "They're beautiful. You're artists." The girls laughed and jumped on the sofa next to him. Abby watched it all, her heart at peace. She had done what she could. She had given Edward the words he needed to hear. Now it was up to him to take the next step, and she hoped with all her heart that he would have the courage, because everyone deserved a second chance, including Edward, including Ruby. Edward drove for nearly 3 hours to get to the town where Ruby lived with her mother. The drive felt longer than it was. Each mile brought a mix of anxiety and hope that tightened his chest. He had called his ex-wife the day before. The conversation was brief, formal, almost cold, but she agreed to let him see Ruby. She just said the final decision would be up to the girl, that she wouldn't force anything. Now parked in front of the familiar house, Edward took a deep breath. His hands were sweating. His heart was racing. He looked in the rearview mirror, trying to calm himself. "You can do this," he muttered to himself. "You can do this." He looked at the passenger seat. There was a small package, wrapped in colorful paper, a simple gift, a hardcover sketchbook and a box of professional colored pencils, nothing extravagant. But chosen with care, thinking of her. Edward got out of the car, grabbed the gift and walked to the door. Each step felt like it weighed a ton. Before he could knock, the door opened. His ex-wife was there, older, more tired, with grey strands he hadn't seen before, but still with that firm gaze he knew so well. "Hi," Edward said, his voice low. "Hi," she replied without emotion. "She's in her room, I'll get her." Edward entered slowly. The house was the same furniture, same colors on the walls, same paintings. But everything felt different, smaller, more distant. Or maybe it was he who was different. He stood in the living room, holding the gift with both hands, as if it were a shield against his fear. Then he heard footsteps, light, hesitant, and she appeared. Ruby. She had grown up. A lot. She was no longer the 12-year-old girl he remembered with so much pain. Now at 16 she was almost a woman, blonde hair tied in a ponytail. Light blue eyes, his eyes that, at that moment, looked at him with distance. "Hi, Ruby," Edward said, his voice cracking. "Hi," she replied, standing at the entrance to the living room. There was a heavy silence. Neither of them knew what to say, how to start, how to break down the wall that stood between them. Ruby's mother appeared behind her, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I'll let you two talk. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." She left, leaving father and daughter alone in the dense silence. Ruby crossed her arms, still standing far away. Edward took a step forward but stopped when he saw she didn't move. You look beautiful," he said, not knowing what else to say. "Thanks." Another silence. Edward swallowed hard. He had to speak. He had to say what he came to say. He couldn't waste this chance. "Ruby, I know I have no right to be here. I know you don't owe me anything, that I don't deserve your attention, but I had to see you. I had to tell you that." He paused, feeling his voice tremble. "Daddy misses you so much." Ruby's eyes glistened. She blinked quickly, looking down at the floor. "I miss you too," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But you hurt, Mom." Edward felt his chest tighten. Each of her words was like a stab, but it was a deserved one. "I know," he admitted, his voice laden with guilt. "I know I hurt her, and there's no excuse for it, none. I was wrong, so wrong, and if I could go back in time, I would change everything. I'd do it all differently, but I can't. I can only try to be different now." Ruby looked at him for the first time, really looked at him. There was hurt in her eyes, pain, but there was also something else, curiosity, a will to believe. "Have you changed?" she asked, her voice suspicious. Edward hesitated. "I'm trying, every day. I'm trying to be a better person, someone you could, one day, maybe respect again." Ruby was quiet, processing. Then she looked at the package in his hands. "What's that?" Edward looked at the gift, having almost forgotten it. "Oh, it's for you, nothing much, just something I thought you might like." He held out the package. Ruby hesitated, looking at the wrapping as if it were a trap. But eventually she took it. She opened it slowly, carefully. When she saw the sketchbook and the colored pencils, she paused. She held the book with both hands, running her fingers over the smooth cover. "You remembered I like to draw," she said, surprised. "Of course I remembered," Edward replied, his voice choked with emotion. "I remember everything, Ruby, every detail. You used to draw all the time when you were little. You drew princesses, castles, animals, flowers, and I kept all the drawings, all of them." Ruby looked at him, her eyes welling up. "You kept them." "I did. I still have them. There's a box in my office, full of your drawings. I look at them when I miss you too much." She clutched the book to her chest, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked. Edward took a slow step forward, testing the waters. "Do you want to go for a walk? We could go to that park you liked when you were little, or anywhere, whatever you want. Or we can stay here, whatever you prefer." Ruby glanced toward the kitchen where her mother was. Then she looked back at Edward. "Okay, let's go to the park." They walked to the park near the house. It was a small place and with a few wooden benches, an area with rusty swings, and a stone path between tall trees. Ruby walked beside him but kept her distance. She didn't talk much. Edward didn't push it either. He just walked and silently grateful that she had agreed. They sat on a bench near the small pond. Ducks swam peacefully in the water. Children played in the distance, their laughter echoing softly. "Do you still come here?" Edward asked, breaking the silence. Sometimes, Ruby answered, looking at the water. When I want to think, when I need quiet. You always loved this place. I remember bringing you here on the weekends. How you'd run to the swings and stay for hours. She nodded, looking at the water with a distant expression. There was a silence. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just silence, full of unsaid words. How are you? Edward asked, looking at her. I'm good. I finished high school this year. I'm going to college next year. Really? Edward smiled, genuinely happy. I'm so proud. What are you going to study? Graphic design. I want to work with art. Illustration, maybe. That makes perfect sense. You were always talented, always had a special eye for things. Ruby looked away, embarrassed by the compliment. She wasn't used to hearing that from him. Not anymore. And you, how are you? She asked, without looking at him. Edward thought before answering. He wanted to be honest. Better than I was. I met some people who helped me see things differently. To see that I can still try to fix what I broke. What people? A woman and her daughters, twins. They're 5 years old. Ruby looked at him, curious and slightly suspicious. Are you dating? No, Edward answered quickly. It's not like that. She's a friend. Someone who showed me that I can still try to be better, that it's not too late. Ruby was quiet, processing the information. She seems nice. She is. She's strong, raising her daughters alone. And even with everything she faces, she doesn't give up. She taught me that, not to give up. Ruby was watching the ducks now, thoughtfully. I missed you, she said suddenly, her voice low. Even when I was angry, even when I was hurt. I missed you. Edward felt his eyes sting. Me too. Every single day. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you. But I'm still hurt, she admitted, looking at him with shining eyes. It still hurts. What you did. What happened to our family. I know, Edward said, his voice firm but full of emotion. And I don't expect you to forgive me now. I don't even know if you'll ever forgive me. And it's okay if you don't. But I want to try. I want to be present, in whatever way you'll let me, on your terms. Ruby looked at him, her eyes wet with tears. No pressure. No pressure at all. You're in charge. You decide. I want a chance to get to know the person you've become and to show you who I'm trying to be. She took a deep breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Okay. They stayed at the park for another hour. They didn't talk much, but they were there, together, and that was something. It was a start. Ruby talked a little about school, about her plans for college. Edward listened to every word with attention, as if committing it all to memory. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Edward walked her back home. At the door, Ruby stopped and looked at him. There was something different in her eyes, less anger, less hurt, maybe a little bit of hope. Thank you for the gift and for coming. Thank you for giving me this chance, for hearing me out. She hesitated, biting her lip. Then she asked, almost afraid of the answer, Will you come back another day? Edward felt his heart squeeze with hope, a hope he hadn't felt in years. Whenever you want. Ruby smiled faintly. It was a small, shy smile, still loaded with caution, but it was real. Okay. She went inside. Edward stood there on the sidewalk, looking at the closed door. For the first time in years, he felt something he had forgotten existed. Hope. 2 days later, Edward returned to Abby's apartment. When she opened the door, she immediately noticed something was different about him. Something had changed, transformed. He was smiling, a real smile. And his eyes had a sparkle she had never seen before. There was a lightness there, a peace that hadn't existed in the days before. Did everything go okay? Abby asked, letting him in. Better than I could have hoped, Edward replied, his voice full of restrained emotion. The girls ran to hug him, as they always did. He hugged them back, lifting them both off the ground and drawing squeals of joy. But he quickly looked back at Abby. Can I talk to you? Of course. They sat at the kitchen table. The girls, sensing it was an adult conversation, went back to playing in their room. "I went to see Ruby," Edward began, his hands clasped on the table, and it was good. Hard but good. She's still hurt. She has every right to be. But she listened to me. She gave me a chance. And in the end she asked if I would come back. Abby smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "Edward, that's wonderful. I knew you could do it. And I only did it because you encouraged me," he said, looking directly at her with deep gratitude. "If I was able to go back to my daughter, if I had the courage to face this, it was because you gave me strength. You showed me I could try, that I should try." Abby felt her eyes sting. "You were the one who was brave. You saved me," Edward interrupted firmly. "In the way that matters. You gave me hope when I had none left. And I want to thank you. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do, and I want to do more than just thank you." Abby frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Edward took a deep breath, as if he was about to make an important decision. "I want to offer you a job at my company." Abby blinked, not understanding. "What?" "A job," Edward repeated, leaning forward. "You work with sewing, right? You have talent, skill. My company has a textile design and production department. I want you to work there. It's something that recognizes your talent, with a fair salary, stability, benefits, all official, on the books." Abby was silent, completely speechless. "Edward, You never asked me for anything," he interrupted, his voice filled with sincerity. "You never expected anything from me. You never reached out for help, even when you needed it. But I want to give you an opportunity. A real one. This isn't charity. It's recognition. You deserve this. You deserve to have stability. You deserve a better future for you and the girls." Abby felt tears stream down her face. I never expected anything like this. I never thought." "I know," Edward said, holding her hand across the table. "But I'm offering. Because you changed my life. You gave me something I had lost, and I want to make a difference in yours too. I want to pay it forward. The right way." Abby wiped her eyes, smiling through her tears. "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart. You have no idea what this means." Edward smiled back, squeezing her hand. "So you accept?" Abby looked at him, at this man who had appeared in their lives so unexpectedly, who had become part of their routine, who had become family. "I accept," she said, her voice firm. And in that moment, they both felt that something new was beginning, something good, something true, something built on gratitude, respect, and genuine affection. Edward had reconnected with his daughter. Abby had found an opportunity, and they had both found in each other something rare, hope. 3 weeks after his first visit to Ruby, Edward showed up at Abby's apartment on a Saturday morning. But this time, he wasn't alone. When Abby opened the door, she saw a blonde teenager standing next to him, tall, with light blue eyes and a shy smile on her face. "Abby, this is Ruby," Edward said proudly, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Ruby, this is Abby." "Hi," Ruby said, giving a small, nervous wave. "Hi, Ruby," Abby replied with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Your father talks about you a lot." Ruby looked at Edward, surprised. "He does?" "All the time," Abby confirmed, making room. "Come in, please. Make yourself at home." Before the conversation could continue, Sophia and Lily came running out of their room, barefoot, their hair messy from playing. "Mr. Ed!" they shouted together, excited. But they stopped suddenly when they saw Ruby. They stood there, curious, observing the new girl. "Hi," Sophia said, tilting her head to the side. "Who are you?" Lily asked directly. Edward knelt to their level, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Girls, this is Ruby. My daughter, Ruby. These are Sophia and Lily." Ruby knelt down too, getting to the twins' level. She smiled nervously. "Hi, girls. It's nice to meet you." Sophia and Lily looked at each other for a second, then smiled at the same time. "You're pretty," Sophia said, without a filter. "You look like a princess," Lily added, her eyes wide. Ruby laughed, embarrassed, her cheeks turning pink. "Thank you. You're very pretty too." "We know," Sophia said, tossing her curls back. Everyone laughed. The initial tension melted away. Edward looked at Abby, hopeful. "I was thinking she could spend the day here, if it's not too much trouble." "Of course not," Abby said, smiling. "Come on in. I'll make some coffee." At first, Ruby seemed a little lost. She didn't quite know how to act around such young children. She sat on the sofa, watching as Sophia and Lily played on the rug with their dolls. She fidgeted with her hands, clearly uncomfortable. But the twins didn't leave room for shyness. "Come play with us," Sophia called, pulling on Ruby's hand. "We're building a giant castle." Lily showed her the colorful blocks scattered around. Ruby looked at Edward, who smiled and nodded. She took a deep breath and sat on the floor with them. She started slowly, stacking blocks, following their excited instructions. No, that one goes on the bottom," Sophia would say, moving the blocks around. "And this one on top to make it really tall," Lily would add. But slowly, Ruby started to loosen up. "We need a really tall tower here," Ruby suggested, picking up a red block. "It's a good idea," Sophia agreed, clapping her hands. "And a big gate for the princess to enter," Lily added. They worked together, building, rebuilding when it fell, laughing when the castle collapsed, and starting all over again without complaint. Abby watched from the kitchen, a cup of coffee in her hands. Edward was beside her, leaning against the counter. "They're getting along well," Abby commented, smiling. "Better than I expected," Edward replied, looking at the three of them. "I was afraid Ruby would be distant. She's not used to little kids." "She's doing great, and the girls love new people, especially when they really play with them." Edward sighed, his shoulders relaxing. "Ruby seems lighter today, more herself. It's been a long time since I've seen her like this." Abby looked at him. "You seem different too, lighter." Edward nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I feel different. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have something real, something that matters." After the castle, the girls decided to draw. Ruby took the book Edward had given her and showed it to Sophia and Lily, opening it on the living room table. "Look here," she said, opening to a blank page. "We can draw whatever we want here." "I want to draw a giant butterfly," Sophia said, grabbing a blue pencil. "I want to draw a unicorn with wings," Lily announced, choosing the pink pencil. "And you, Ruby? What are you going to draw?" Sophia asked. Ruby thought for a moment, looking at the two of them. "I'm going to draw the three of us." "Us?" Lily asked, excited, her eyes shining. "That's right. You two and me, together." The girls clapped their hands, thrilled. Ruby began to draw with soft, careful strokes. Sophia and Lily leaned in to watch, fascinated by every line that appeared. "You draw so well," Sophia said, impressed. "It looks real," Lily added, her mouth agape. Ruby smiled, continuing the drawing with more confidence. There was something therapeutic about it, something healing. It had been a long time since she had drawn with such passion. She drew the three of them holding hands in an open field, smiles on their faces, hair in the wind, a bright sun above, simple, but full of meaning, full of life. When she finished, she showed it to them. "Done." "It's beautiful," Sophia said, touching the paper carefully. "We look so pretty." "And you too," Lily agreed, smiling from ear to ear. Can I keep this drawing to put in my room?" Sophia asked hopefully. Ruby hesitated, looking at the drawing. It was the first one she had made with so much care in a long time. But then she looked at the girls, at their genuine excitement, and she smiled. "Of course, it's for you." Sophia and Lily hugged Ruby tightly, nearly knocking her over. "Thank you." "Thank you," they said together. Ruby laughed, hugging them back. And in that moment she felt something heal inside her, something small but important, an old wound beginning to close. The afternoon flew by. They played hide-and-seek in the small apartment, put together a colorful puzzle on the table, and made up crazy stories with the dolls. Ruby, who was withdrawn at first, was now laughing loudly, running through the apartment, playing without fear of looking silly. Edward and Abby watched everything from the sofa, side by side, in comfortable silence. "Seeing this, it gives me hope," Edward said, his voice low, full of emotion. Abby looked at him attentively. "Hope for what?" "That things can still be fixed, that you can still build something good, something true, even after everything I destroyed, even after everything I lost." Abby placed her hand on his, squeezing it gently. "You didn't destroy everything, you made a mistake, but now you're fixing it. You're really trying. And that's what matters." Edward looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for everything, for giving me this space, for letting Ruby into your lives without hesitation. No need to thank me. We love having her here. The girls love it. You have no idea how much you've changed my life. You gave me a purpose again. You made me believe it's still worth trying." Abby smiled, squeezing his hand. "You changed ours too, in a way you can't even imagine." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ruby had to leave. Edward was taking her back to her mother's house. At the door, Sophia and Lily hugged Ruby tightly, as if they were already old friends. "Will you come back?" Sophia asked, holding her hand. "You will, won't you, please? We liked you a lot," Lily insisted. Ruby looked at Edward, who smiled and nodded. "Of course I'll be back, if you want me to." "We do, a lot," the two said together, jumping up and down. Ruby knelt down to their level and hugged them both at the same time. "Then I'll be back. I really promise." They waved until Ruby and Edward disappeared down the stairs. Abby closed the door slowly and sighed, smiling. "She's special," she said to the girls. "We liked her a lot," Sophia replied, holding the drawing carefully. "She draws really well, better than anyone," Lily added. Abby agreed, her heart warm. Something was changing, for all of them. And it was a good change. 2 weeks later, on a normal Thursday afternoon, Edward showed up as usual. But this time, Ruby was with him again. The girls shouted with joy when they saw her through the window. "Ruby!" They ran to the door and hugged her. "Hi, girls," Ruby said, laughing, kneeling to hug them both. They came inside. Edward and Ruby sat on the sofa. The girls clung to Ruby, one on each side, showing her the new drawings they had made. Abby brought coffee for Edward and herself. She even made a special hot chocolate with marshmallows for Ruby. "Thank you," Ruby said, holding the mug with both hands. "You're welcome. I'm glad you came back. The girls asked about you almost every day." Ruby smiled, completely at ease now. "I missed them too. The girls are really nice. And funny." Edward watched it all with a calm smile. There was a lightness about him now, a peace that wasn't there before, a serenity that had taken years to arrive but was finally there. After the girls went back to playing on the rug, he turned to Abby, serious. "I just wanted to thank you one more time." Abby rolled her eyes playfully. "Edward, you've thanked me 1,000 times. You don't have to anymore." "I know, but it's just that you all taught me something important, something I had completely forgotten." "What's that?" "That presence is more important than anything, more important than money, expensive gifts, or empty promises. Just being there, being truly there, being present in the lives of the people we love." Abby felt her eyes sting. "You learned the lesson well," Edward smiled, looking at Ruby, who was now laughing with the girls, completely at ease. "I had good teachers." Abby's new job had started weeks ago. She worked in the design department of Edward's company, creating patterns, helping with the production of special pieces. The salary was fair, more than she made before. She had full benefits. Say a fixed schedule, real stability. For the first time in years, Abby felt respected, valued, recognized for what she did. She wasn't just a seamstress working from home for a few bucks anymore. She was a professional, with a contract, with rights, with a future. The girls were doing well, happier, more secure. They had new clothes, plenty of food on the table every day, toys, books, everything they needed. And most importantly, they had hope. They had a future. Edward was different too. He visited Ruby with increasing frequency. The relationship was still fragile, still being rebuilt brick by brick. But there was real progress. There was a genuine connection. And he continued to visit Abby and the girls, not out of obligation, not out of pity, not out of guilt. But because he wanted to, because he needed to, because there, in that simple apartment, he found something he couldn't find anywhere else. Family, not in the traditional sense, not with defined titles or labels, not with established roles, but in the truest sense, people who cared, who were present, who chose to be together. Day after day, without expecting anything in return. That afternoon, as the three girls played in the room and Abby and Edward talked in the living room, there was a sense of completeness in the air, of a cycle closed. No exaggerated promises, no forced bonds, no unrealistic expectations or impossible dreams, just people who found each other at the right time. And who did the best for one another? Edward had reconnected with his daughter. He had found a new purpose. He had learned that it was still possible to fix what seemed broken forever. Abby had found financial stability, a professional opportunity, respect, and true friendship. Ruby had reconnected with her father and gained two temporary little sisters who made her laugh and feel light and loved. Sophia and Lily had gained someone who was truly present, who played with them, who genuinely cared, who chose to be there. And everyone, in some deep way, had found hope. The story didn't have a grand finale. It didn't have dramatic twists. It didn't have cinematic kisses or emotional declarations. It had something better. It had simplicity, raw truth, spontaneous affection, and sometimes that's all we need, just to be there, just to be, just to live, one day at a time, alongside people who truly see us. Edward looked around. He saw Ruby laughing with the girls in the room. He saw Abby smiling as she watched the scene, and for the first time in a very, very long time, he felt at home, not in a house of walls and a roof, but in a home made of people, of true presence, of silent but real love. And that, he knew deep in his heart, was the greatest gift anyone could ever receive. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.